Welcome back to the program. Joining me on the set right now is the former Pakistani ambassador to the United Kingdom and Ireland, Akbar Ahmed. He has done extensive research on Islam in Europe and studied what factors lead to Muslim young people joining extremist groups. Ambassador, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
There's something like 15,000 young people from 80 countries who are flocking to join ISIS. This is a murderous group committing some of the worst atrocities we've seen in a very long time. What is the attraction for young people?
This is a great question, Anand, and one that contains all kinds of enigmas and bafflement and mysteries. And this is the subject of my new study, Journey into Europe. I've also conducted a study in America looking at the Muslim community here, because really the study has to be seen in a larger context, which is what is going on in Muslim societies, which in fact creates factors that produce these youngsters who are prepared to give up a very comfortable life in the United States or Europe and go off and literally commit suicide, kill people, or be killed and destroy themselves. So we have to condemn the violence. And we have to understand there's a whole set of factors. It's complicated. There are internal factors and there are external factors. Internal to the community, internal to the failure of the imams, the religious leaders, to instruct these youngsters in a certain way within this new environment. The failure of their parents who are too preoccupied making money, becoming doctors or engineers. Remember this, the earlier generation. This generation of jihadists are in fact the third generation of immigrants. There's the failure of larger society, the constant Islamophobia, constantly being attacked, their God, their prophet, their customs are humiliated, attacked in the media, which further alienates them. And then there's the failure of the government itself not to implement programs that would legitimately integrate them into society with jobs, with education, so that they don't feel as they do. I've talked to hundreds of these kids, suspended between two cultures. They don't quite belong to the culture of their parents, so they've left behind the villages of Punjab or Bengal or Egypt, and they don't quite belong to Manchester or Birmingham or in America, LA or New York. So they're suspended. It's a very dangerous situation when you're young, you're confused, and you're vulnerable. This is when imams or people with bad intent to do harm and violence can easily push them in a certain direction. And that is what is happening to a lot of them.
You mentioned some important factors there, but I'm wondering to what extent the deliberate policies pursued by Western governments has contributed to ISIS recruitment. We look at things like the imprisonment of Muslims without trial, the torture of those people. We look at drone attacks, which has killed civilians. We look at US policy towards the Palestinians in the Middle East. I mean, to what extent does that drive recruitment?
It's very directly linked, Anand, because remember, we've got to keep this in mind. These are American citizens or British citizens or French. These aren't Pakistanis or Egyptians. Their parents may have been. So put this in the context of young British or American youth having this kind of reaction to political developments. So they're following all these developments over the last couple of years. And we must not forget also, we assume that there's something new, completely new. When we say ISIS, oh my God, it's never happened before, that youngsters have gone to fight. We mustn't forget that in Afghanistan, Westerners came to fight. In Bosnia in the 1990s, you had a lot of British youth going to Bosnia to help medically or socially or education-wise, or even fight. You've always had this streak in Western society where youth is motivated by some kind of idealism. I call it the Hemingway factor. You remember in the 1930s, Ernest Hemingway went to Spain. They were fighting the fascists. He wrote a book, For Whom the Bell Tolls. So that is embedded in Western society. And these youngsters are living in the West. So they are motivated. And these factors that you mentioned, Guantanamo Bay and Abu Ghraib, etc., are constant reminders that there is injustice and something must be done about it. I take issue, Anand, both as a social scientist, as someone committed to interfaith dialogue, and as a Muslim, in the method in which they are responding, not the passion with which they're responding. I think this passion should go into building bridges, building schools, building health facilities in Muslim countries, rather than turning up there and blowing themselves up. So it's the method, and that method can only come to them through their religious leaders, or their social leaders, or their parents. And as I said, those have been MIA, missing in action.
Right, let's look at the other side of that. There are significant Muslim populations in many Western countries, particularly in Europe. Do these Western governments in Europe face a major challenge in how they deal with Muslim populations? And I mean, are they up to the task? Are they doing something about it?
The Muslim situation in Europe has come to European governments as a surprise. Now, I've been writing about this since the 1990s when I was at Cambridge University, and I saw this coming. It's surprised Western governments, and they have responded as they would a knee-jerk response. Unfortunately, some of their responses feed into the Islamophobia. At the same time, there have been some very positive developments, initiatives taken by these governments. I know that the British government or the German government have taken some very, very serious steps in order to recognize the problems of this Muslim minority. It's taken a long time, but it is coming. As against that, we have the clock, as it were, ticking on and time running out with these acts of beheading and these other savage acts that come from the Muslim world and then feed into society, into a kind of xenophobia, and again into the right-wing groups which are emerging in Europe, again Europe, where they're winning seats in city councils, even in parliament, in Greece, for example, and their focus is on the immigrants, specifically the Muslim immigrants.
Right, here is the view that we don't often hear about or read about, and that is the view of young people, just ordinary young people who go to mosques, who live in Western countries. You've traveled across Europe, you've traveled across North America, you've visited dozens of mosques, you've talked with them. What did you hear from them?
Well, I'll tell you, Anand, I was most impressed by the Muslim community. They had a great deal of vitality. They were aware there is a challenge. They're very much aware, both internally, as I explained, and externally. And they wanted to do something about it with a lot of vigor and a lot of confidence. I think what is failing them really is their own leadership. They need guidance. They need that connection with the older strata, and that is not really happening as much as I want to. Remember, there are honorable exceptions to this. Some Muslims have done very, very well, and they act as guides and icons. There are 2 congressmen in the United States. There are a dozen members of the House of Lords and Commons in London, and so on. But that's not enough to take an entire community in one direction. For that to happen, both the government, the local government, whether it's British or American, has to work hand in hand closely with the Muslim leadership, and a program that's going to be long-term, is going to be holistic, in order to prevent these individuals going across committing acts of violence which then harm them and then harm their own community. There's a backlash, and then harm the country that they live in, whether as Americans or as British.
Right, we started by talking about those recruits who are going to Syria, going to Iraq to fight for ISIL. Many of them are returning to their home countries, to these countries in Western Europe. And the manner in which these countries are dealing with these returning jihadists is very different. I mean, on the one hand, we got Denmark, which says, look, okay, now we have to create opportunities for young people. We have to show them what they say is the right way. And then on the other hand, you've got Britain, which says, no, we're going to ban them outright. We're going to remove their citizenship and all that and alienate them even further.
I would say, Anand, again, I've been an administrator, I would say the way to deal with society is to incorporate it, not to cut it off. Because when you cut off a section of the population, you're just simply creating more problems. You have to deal with them sooner or later, because you just can't kick the can down the road, which is what's happening when you're overly harsh with them. Sooner or later, they have to be integrated. Give them jobs. Let them act as guys. Let them point out what went wrong in their own lives so that they become role models for the young generation to be able to show them the right path to peace, to harmony in the new societies. They have every facility living in the West. They have education, they have media, they have television. They can be doing so much to talk about the problems that they face as a community.
Ambassador, thanks for joining us. Ambassador Akbar Ahmed, thanks for your insights. We are going to take a break right now. Up next, we talk to 2 former radicals and hear their stories about why they joined and later defected from extremist groups. That's coming up. You're watching The Heat.
On CCTV News, we take you further.
We take you further with our Insight segment, going in depth on important issues of the day.
We take you further around China than any other network, bringing you the stories that matter on our Across China segment.
We take you further with our coverage across the Americas and beyond.
living in the West, I know how you feel when I used to live there. In the heart, you feel depressed. The Prophet ﷺ said, the cure for the depression is jihad fi sabilillah.
That was an ISIL fighter from the West and why he joined the organization. To shed more light on the phenomenon, we have joining us two former radicals who have now changed their views. From Toronto, we have Mubeen Sheikh. He is a former extremist who later turned into an informant for the Canadian Intelligence Service. He played a major role in thwarting a terror plot in 2006. And joining us here in Washington is Tawfiq Hamid, an Islamic thinker and reformer and one-time Islamic extremist from Egypt. Thanks to both of you for joining us.
Pleasure.
Tawfiq, let me start with you. You once joined a very militant Islamic group called Al-Jamal al-Islamiyah. Why did you join that group? That was many years ago.
Yeah, it was around 33 or 35 years ago. And I joined them, believe me, for one simple reason. I was motivated to serve my religion and God, nothing more than this. I was highly educated. My family was a wealthy family. My family was a very liberal family. And I developed such a dedication to serve God and religion. And this was, for me, the way to serve it. So its energy was in me to serve God and the religion, and it was directed wrongly.
Let's go to Mubeen in Canada. Mubeen, you once said that you were ready to go to Afghanistan to become a jihadist because it was the right thing to do. But later, you became an informant for the Canadian Security Service. What made you change your mind? And, I mean, what did you do as an informant?
So, I first got indoctrinated or introduced to the concept in 1995. I had gone to India and Pakistan, and in Pakistan I was in Quetta, which is where the Taliban Shura was, and later Al-Qaeda Shura would be. When I met them, I was a young kid who I had an identity crisis living in the West, so I had a public school life during the day and a Quran school life at night. And I didn't know who I was supposed to be. How much of one side should I be? So when I met the Taliban, I met them and they said to me, it was a chance encounter. They said, look, jihad is the way to bring about change in the world. So I kept that up, the jihadi mentality, until the 9/11 attacks, which made me really reconsider my views. I then moved to Syria to study Arabic and Islamic studies. And it's there that I moved away from my views after studying, the Quran properly, the context, the history, of the verses of the Quran that talk about fighting. And eventually I became an operative, is the correct term. I was actually undercover for about 2 years in other cases. About one of those cases moved on to become a public prosecution, and that's how I became known as an undercover in that context.
Right, Tawfiq, you said a moment ago that you joined the militant Islamic organization because you thought that was the best way to serve your religion. Is that to some extent why, and just to some extent, why some people, young people, are now joining groups like ISIS?
Yes, certainly. There is no doubt about this. This could be seen as the main cause of the problem. There could be some contributing factors or factors that drive someone to join the group initially. Like we can say that, for example, it's much easier to recruit a poor, deprived person full of hatred to the society, to such groups, than or recruiting someone who is not in such a situation. But we have to be very clear in our...
Because these are not poor, deprived people.
But that is the point. That the cause of the problem is radicalism and the process it uses to brainwash people. That is the main cause of the problem. To create hatred toward the other, to create intolerance, to use the hellfire tactic and the torture, the fear mechanism, to use sex as a factor that makes people ready to die, to go to paradise, to have sex with women there. And I've seen many cases like this. So this is a fundamental cause. But there could be other contributing factors, like some people try to find their identity, for example. They join the group, but we have to distinguish between the cause of the problem and the contributing factors for the problem. And if we want to fight this problem effectively, we have to focus on the cause, because sometimes, like poverty, as I mentioned to you in some earlier discussion, that radicalism itself and terrorism causes poverty in the areas where they have high terrorism level. You don't have foreign investment, you have tourism industry collapsing in many places that needs it. So at the end, the poverty can be seen as an outcome of terrorism rather than simply the cause of the problem. Okay. It's an outcome for it.
Let me get Mubeen's take on this. Mubeen, I mean, there are thousands of people from dozens of countries clamoring to join groups like ISIL in the Middle East. Why do you think they're going there?
You know, I would have to agree with the doctor. I mean, I simplify it as grievance-based ideology. The ideology will not have traction if there isn't some kind of pre-existing political problem. And even, I mean, you could say, I mean, it's interconnected. So a person might think that, look, you know, I should be living in a khilafah, in a caliphate, but I'm living in a democracy. So there's no real grievance in that sense. It's just he feels that he's entitled to living in an Islamic state. But especially with Western individuals who are going, you know, when you look at somebody who is going through an identity crisis, look, you have a young kid who's living in the West. He has no good job, no prospect of marriage. He's a loser.
But
this group comes
one moment, I'll give you a chance. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, just as an example, I mean, and I agree with the doctor, I mean, these are contributing factors. I'm just looking at an example of a kid who's, he probably doesn't know the religion very well. He doesn't. He knows that he's supposed to be Muslim. He's watching videos of suffering, killing. He develops what's called a vicarious deprivation, that he himself is not physically deprived, but he's looking at others who are deprived, and then he begins to think their deprivation is my deprivation. I must do something. So the group will offer him a status, a hero status. And this is somebody who's coming from, he's got nothing really going on in his life. Now he has an opportunity to belong to something greater. He has an opportunity to become a hero. And that's really something that they really look forward to.
Right, he's found his identity. Tawfiq, you want to say?
I would like to say that I agree that the political factors and the identity issue are used to create jihadists. However, we cannot say that they are the main cause of the problem. It's important to emphasize this because the same factors does not work for non-Muslims who live under the same socio-economic and political circumstances.
Right.
Like, for example, why we didn't see the same percentage of Iraqi Christians, for example, doing or Christians who migrate to other countries, why they do not adopt jihad, for example, or why they don't do terrorism. They live under the same economic circumstances, same work problem, same feel of identity crisis sometimes. Yeah.
Okay, I've just got 30 seconds left. Mubeen, I want to ask you a question, a bit of a personal question. How did the Muslim community respond after it was revealed that you had been acting as an operative for the Canadian Intelligence Service, perhaps being looked at as one of the enemy?
Of course, I mean, the narrative that developed was that I was a traitor to my people. That's one narrative. I mean, the other narrative was people were actually, they thanked me. You know, I've had both sides. I mean, you have some who don't like it, and these are people who are sympathizers, or they feel, whatever the case, you know, the West is the enemy, so I help the enemy, therefore I'm the enemy. But you know, just to echo that point of Dr. Hamid, that, yeah, I mean, ideology is, when your worldview is shaped by religious identity, then everything you think and everything you do will flow from that ideology.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there, gentlemen. Thanks for joining us. Mubeen Sheikh in Toronto, Tawfiq Hamid here in Washington. Thank you. That is it for this edition of The Heat. We'd love to hear from you, so please send us your questions, comments, and story ideas to theheat@cctv-america.com. You can continue the conversation on Facebook at CCTV America. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.
A land that is growing at a rapid pace.
It's a smash and grab business model where you come in and you transform urban space.
Full of natural resources.
Miners still tap into veins of tin, zinc and silver.
And many races. With the largest rainforest on the planet, it is in constant change, fighting to succeed.
Is hosting mega events like the World Cup and the Olympics worth the financial and human costs of having to displace so many families?
Hear their voices. Walk with us through the Americas.